Rob Davis with Minette Musical Instruments here. It's January 2023. In trying to evaluate your work objectively, it's good to have some kind of a checklist to run down. And especially if you might need to be making a video of a drum for someone else to evaluate remotely, it's good to have a checklist, kind of a script to run down to help organize your thoughts. And let's take a look at that right now. This is left side of one of our school model double seconds. I would normally be doing this first with just the outer row tuned on my own work. I more or less run through all these considerations with just the outer row tuned without having worked on the inner part of a drum at all. But since this drum is already completed, I've dampened off the inner notes. And then when I get the rest of the drum tuned, I would continue with the evaluation, obviously. So let's see how that works out here. We're first going to evaluate the partial structure of each note and identify overtones at 4F, 2 octaves above the fundamental, 4F and above, that are at least part of the reason that individual note sounds good. We're then going to evaluate the response of each note individually, demonstrating that it works well soft, it blooms, it's not real thuddy, and it works well loud. It doesn't buckle too much, too easily, and also demonstrating that there isn't really a good spot or a bad spot or area on each note. The whole note is the good spot. We don't have any cases where the middle of the note is dead or kind of the left 2/3 of a note work, but like the right half or the right third of a note is kind of dead or whatever. We don't want any of that. And then we're going to evaluate consistency of response and tone from note to note. And because I happen to have all of these notes tuned already, we're actually going to extend that evaluation into the lowest couple of inner notes. So let's take a look at this drum. Starting with low E, 4F. 2 octaves above the fundamental. That's all I've got on this one. F sharp. I actually have kind of a fake 5F. You can hear it up there. Listen for that pitch, but slightly flat. That's actually not in tune anywhere if we test around. It's kind of close, but it's too far away. So 5F independently isn't really in tune. The note's kind of making its own 5F. It's not coming from the B flat next to it. It's just making its own. But I do have 6F and 7F. About a 30-cent flat E. A flat, we've got 6F. We've got 3F and 6F. B flat, I also have 6F. On the B flat, I also have 5F. 5F and 6F. On C, I've got 4F and 6F. A second octave. And a second harmonic. 4F and 6F. On D, I've just got 4F. On E, I've got 4F. Notably, on this E, I do not have the 12th. I don't have 3F in tune. But it's working great. It's fine. On F sharp, I've got 4F. And actually, I happen to have 5F in tune on this F sharp. So now let's demonstrate the response of each of these notes. Buckles a little bit, but that's not too bad for a low E. It's not a professional drum, it's a school model drum, and so this is good. It's not bad at all, especially when everything is ringing freely. It's fine. The F sharp. The low F sharp. A flat. B flat. C. D. It's a little squirrely. It's not great, but it's not bad. It's pulling plenty of brightness from this D. You'll see later. E. Low E is humming just a little bit. It was doing it worse. It's one of the things I had to fix on this drum. Low E is humming a little, but it's not too bad. And F sharp. Let's think about evenness of tone and response. With the exception of D, which is a little weak, but it'll be fine later when the whole drum's ringing. You'll see in a minute. And then let's just uncover these and so we have an evenness of response from the upper notes of the outer row going into the lower notes of the inner row. You need that. Okay, so now we're going to do basically the same thing for the inner notes. Basically the same concept. Identifying the important partial structure of the inner notes, the vast majority of the time is going to amount to simply demonstrating how high the second octaves go. And that's pretty much it. How high did I get second octaves on this drum, and are they really lined up? We're going to demonstrate good response, very soft and also very loud, as I did with the outer row, and demonstrate evenness of tone. And we're also going to demonstrate no or almost no interference. Very, very little interference or no interference. So on this particular drum, I happen to get second octaves up to and including D. So let's take a look at this A flat. Importantly, the other pitch, kind of up at the level of the second octave, is sharper, just barely. It's a little close, but the note's working okay. You'll see in a minute. B flat. C. And D. In the case of this D, the highest note that has a second octave, the other pitch, 45 degrees away from the second octave, is actually lower. But you'll get that on the very highest notes where you have a second octave on a drum. Just don't be doing it on lower notes. Unless it's some kind of emergency and it's weird and it's just definitely working great, okay then. But as a rule, no, don't do it until you get to these higher notes. And there is no second octave in tune on this. It's just all flat. Now we're going to demonstrate that these notes all work soft to loud and that there isn't much of a dead spot at all until we get to the higher notes. And even then, it needs to be not too big and not real dead. You'll definitely get some of that when you get to the highest inner notes, but let's just take a look at that. First octave in tune on all the notes up here. And even on this high D, the harmonic 90 degrees away is actually higher. It doesn't have to be like that when you get up to about D. The harmonic could be lower, but on this drum it just worked out. And now let's carefully demonstrate that there's no interference with everything undampened. We're going to listen very carefully. You've really got to pretty much line up a drum, not to the very cent, but to within a couple or 3 cents to really be sure, maybe. So let's just... Interference side to side? Not really. In a few cases, there is a tiny amount of warbling. For example, there's a minuscule amount of interference between this F sharp and the octave of this F sharp. There's a little warble, and I identified beforehand that it isn't just that they're out of tune by a couple of cents. It really is a tiny amount of interference. But that's not bad at all, that's okay. So that's how to evaluate a drum real carefully. A few minor issues that are present on this drum are not bad at all, and this is a good solid school model drum. You'll note that this D, because I have perfect cleanliness here, it's pulling a little bit of brightness, it's shaped right, and it's working great, and it doesn't sound out of context with the rest of the notes. So there you have it. It occurs to me I left a significant question unaddressed in the demonstration you just saw, and that is, why do we care that the outer row is independently bright and sensitive and nice and all that kind of thing without the inner notes? Suppose it's not, but the outer notes sound fine when the inner notes are in tune and left to ring freely. Isn't that okay? What's wrong with that? Well, if your outer notes are independently bright, it does result in a superior final result. It gives the outer notes better immediacy of response. As soon as you play that note, it immediately starts to bloom in a nice way. It helps it to be more sensitive, but it helps it to bloom more immediately. That immediacy of response is better. Also, if the outer notes are not independently sensitive and have some brightness to them, you're much more likely to get a little bit of stick thump when you play that note. Even if the note later blooms begrudgingly after a couple of tenths of a second or something like that, that stick thump that you're more likely to get with an outer note that's not independently sensitive is also undesirable. Also, if you can make independently bright and sensitive outer notes, it gives you the freedom to separate notes from each other whenever you would need to fully fix an interference problem. If I am not able to do that every time, then my hands are kind of tied, and I might have to live with a little bit of interference for the sake of an outer note that at least has some kind of brightness to it. But if my outer notes don't need the inner notes to sound good, I'm completely free to separate them completely if I need to. I can really cut notes back from each other or angle notes away from each other as I might need to fully solve an interference problem. So you want to have that freedom as well, because it helps you to make a perfectly clean instrument, and that's obviously very nice. And finally, if your outer notes are independently bright, then as a drum starts to drift out of tune, it can still be reasonably sensitive and have some brightness to it. Think about an outer note that's not independently bright. Its octave needs to be at just about the same pitch as the note, an octave higher. to have some brightness to it. As those start to drift out of tune, then I'm no longer getting that sympathetic response. And a drum can more quickly start to sound kind of dull and really unpleasant. Whereas if the outer notes are independently okay, then even when a drum starts to become a little out of tune, it can still have a decent response, and we want that too. So it really does lead to a superior final result. And if you can't do that every time, if you can't get that in your own work, I bet you sometimes do. So study those notes that work out so well. Study them very carefully. How do they look? How do they feel under the hammer? How do different parts of them feel? Evaluate the shape of them carefully from above, from the bottom. Sometimes you can feel aspects of the shape from one side or the other that you can't really perceive any other way. So study those examples very carefully and keep striving to make your own work like that. Don't become lackadaisical just because you're getting a satisfactory result. Keep pushing yourself forward until you can do what you just saw. Good luck.